Push the red button.
Apparently, the traditional advice for giving a speech like this is that one begins with an introduction of oneself and a joke. And we're pressed for time tonight, so all I can say is that if you know me well, you won't be surprised to hear that this is the introduction, and that was the joke. What I wanted to talk about today was, it's a little hot in here. I mean, I like what this shirt represents and all, but I'm not that comfortable in it. I just think I'd be more comfortable if I just sort of slipped out of one shell into another. This is the flag of Europia. You can think of Europia as being something like Norman Lowell's Imperium Europa. Could you hand me my stick, please? It's down there. I almost forgot it. Norman Lowell gave me this. He's a Maltese white nationalist, a Maltese politician. He's trying to get in the EU Parliament, but I filmed him speaking in London, and he gave me this stick that he always uses in his speeches. He's got another one. But anyway, where was I? Yes. Well, it was white nationalist eco-fascism, but we did market testing on that, and it turns out that eco-national futurism tests much better. So we're going with that. So this is the flag of Europia, eco-national futurism, related ID to Imperium Europa. What I wanted to talk about today, and by the way, the speakers tonight have been very good, and I completely agree that it's going to get very bad very fast. And that's actually how I got into this field, not from the racial angle, but from realizing that we're about to have a collapse, some sort of collapse. Doesn't mean a collapse to nothing, but we're going to have a severe civilizational crisis. And in fact, we're already in it. Now, I also wanted to talk tonight about the Tower of Babel and the subject without confines. And you've all heard of the Tower of Babel, but I'm going to take it from the beginning of time and put it at the end of time and recast the story. And none of you have heard of the subject without confines, and it's a difficult concept. It's sort of Hegelian, working off the ideas of Alexander Dugin. And not only do I think that I'm likely to alienate this audience with what I'm about to explain or try to explain, but I think I can alienate absolutely any audience. So, in a way, that's sort of leveling. I'm saying that, as far as I'm concerned, you're the same as the most brilliant people in the world. Yes. Okay. The Tower of Babel. It was a story in Genesis about all men spoke a common language. They said, we will build a building so high that we will challenge the unique majority of God himself. And it's really about competition with God. In fact, there are versions of the story not in the Bible, which report that men fired arrows up into the air, and they came back tipped with blood, as if the arrows had pierced heaven, pierced the angels, and pierced God himself. And so it was an aggressive act. And they built this tower, but God stopped them by confusing their languages. So the tower didn't collapse as far as we know. People just wandered away. And I'm sure eventually it collapsed. But if you take the Tower of Babel and put it at the other end of history, our end, right, and you make it synonymous with the whole project of modernity, of globalization, of integration, then you see that, in fact, what's happened, if you think of the Tower of Babel and use it as a metaphor for what we've done in the last few hundred years on this planet, then you see that it's in reverse. Of course, you start out with different languages, and you end up with the same language. Okay? I just think it's an interesting metaphor. And that brings me to Alexander Dugin and his essay on the subject without confines. Now, little philosophy background. Dugin is, and the sources that Dugin is using, is playing off an idea from the guy named Hegel, who was a philosopher that I personally haven't read in detail and don't intend to. But Hegel was very big in the 1830s, 1840s, and people that came after him, like Nietzsche and Soren Kierkegaard, who I'm named after, used his ideas a lot. And you actually recognize them if I explain them to you. So Hegel had this idea that history was a history of ideas working themselves out in the world. And that the way these things work was by opposites. You have an idea. That's the thesis. Then the opposing idea comes up and fights against it. That's the antithesis. And they fight, and you get a third thing coming out of that. That's the synthesis. Right? Then the synthesis becomes the new thesis, and then that draws out a new antithesis and everything. That's how the world evolves. That's how the thinking evolves. And the world is somehow, world history is the embodiment of ideas. Now, I don't know how much Alexander Dugin is a Russian philosopher and well, not politician, but political thinker, geopolitical thinker, and I really don't have time to explain who he is at all. I'm just going to say, in this, what I'm about to explain, he is, I think, I don't know how much of it he gets from, there were some Italian Marxists during the 1970s, and I won't bother you with their names. I'm not quite sure how much he took from that. But Dugin's idea was the following, okay? That, well, he wrote this essay about aggression, on aggression. And you notice that the whole idea is that I explained this all in my London speech, the whole thing about Heraclitus and aggression or struggle being actually the generative force behind the whole world, or at least the living world. And I explained this at length in London. I don't have time to go into it now. But what we have is now the liberal project, the Jewish project, the One World project, the Mondialist project. Mondial is French for one world, so mondialist means one world or globalist. That project is supposedly about, there used to be them and us, there were all these petty wars, but we were so foolish, but now we've discovered how to be rich all the time, keep growing the pie, keep putting more chairs to play musical chairs with, and it's gonna keep getting better forever. We're gonna keep growing the tower forever, and nothing bad can ever happen as long as it keeps growing and growing, right? And we don't have to have wars anymore. There is no them and us anymore. There is only us, a big us. It includes everybody. You know, people in Darfur and Jews and whites and people all over the world, and maybe even chimpanzees and dogs because they have feelings too.
They can vote.
They have feelings. They have feelings. Connected with this one world, this globalist project, is the idea of dissolving all borders and seeing all living things or conscious living things or humans as unified because they can feel, because they can experience, because they have needs. Now, back to philosophy, this involves seeing people as objects. So, subject-object, it's very easy to understand. You have a sentence, the dog bit the man. The dog is the subject, the man is the object, right? So when I see people as the same because they can experience the same feelings, right? I'm declaring their unity on the basis of their objecthood, of what can be done to them and what they can experience. Not on the basis of what they can do. The subject does. The object is the patient or the sufferer or the recipient. And so, going back to this Hegel thing about thesis calling forth its antithesis, Dugin's idea is, well, maybe this attempt to create the universal, the absolute object, destroying all borders, and making everybody the same in one unity. Now, you notice there are no groups anymore, they're just individuals who are, in some holy sense, equivalent.